In the initial days of their imprisonment, an atmosphere of unease, quiet restraint, and wary looks prevailed, while scores of Japanese soldiers captured in war passed through the fenced entrances of the U.S. facility. Many showed up wearing tattered attire, the cloth stiff with layers of perspiration and grime accumulated over prolonged fighting and eventual capitulation. The grueling treks, the perpetual grit from paths on remote islands, and the merciless warmth of the tropics had drained their physical reserves. Yet none of it could have readied them for the unfamiliar scene that lay beyond the barriers. Once they underwent enrollment procedures, health examinations, and the handing out of essential items, the group was directed toward a spacious, timbered facility featuring conduits snaking along the ceiling. What they encountered there halted several in mid-step. This setup bore no resemblance to the installations familiar from their campaigns across the ocean. Along the piping of steel, broad arrays of spouts extended outward, positioned above individual grates for runoff. Efficient and quick in their movements, the American sentries signaled for the men to undress and form a queue. It dawned on numerous captives then that their detention went beyond mere confinement. They were being required to clean themselves. A wave of bewilderment coursed through the group of inmates. During the conflict, hygiene routines for Japanese troops had been infrequent, typically makeshift along riverbanks or ocean shores, and perpetually limited by scant resources. The notion of soap remained an extravagance, but now, under the control of their fiercest adversaries, these soldiers found themselves guided into a structured ceremony of purification. Certain individuals gripped their possessions tightly, suspecting some form of deception. Meanwhile, others murmured anxiously over the vapor emanating from the conduits. Echoes lingered in their minds of the stories circulated by commanders prior to capitulation, accounts portraying the Americans as savages, imprisonment as a source of degradation, and captives as objects of treatment more degrading than that afforded to beasts. Gazing upon the shiny metallic fixtures of the showers, the captives pondered whether this setup concealed some insidious torment. The overseers, growing irritated by the delay, shouted commands in English and waved emphatically once more. Footwear, waistbands, and outer garments needed to come off entirely. Hesitantly, fingers worked at fastenings, revealing forms marked by the rigors of tropical warfare. Amid unfamiliar faces and their own comrades, the detainees sensed deep exposure and shame. Yet compliance followed, as they gripped the bars of soap pressed into their hands. Next arrived the rush of liquid from above. Jets of pure, steaming fluid poured forth from the conduits, startling the group with their heat. Briefly, they stiffened in place, bracing for agony. But as the flow traced paths along their spines and upper bodies, stripping away accumulated filth, an unexpected serenity enveloped them. A few shut their eyelids, allowing the muck to eddy toward the outlets below. Some prisoners applied the coarse soap tentatively, almost as though verifying that permission had indeed been granted. Gradually, that first wave of apprehension gave way to a subdued sense of wonder. For months, or perhaps even longer, they hadn't experienced warmth and cleanliness like this. During their battles across those distant islands, supplies of water were strictly limited, clean sources scarce or absent altogether, while infestations of lice and outbreaks of illness spread unchecked. Standing beneath a steady flow of steaming water, free from the need for pails, free from barked orders by superiors, free from any curbs, represented an indulgence bordering on the unimaginable. Captured by the foe, they found themselves more spotless than at any point in the Spartan quarters of their own military units. Upon stepping out, piles of plush cotton towels stood ready, neatly arranged. A number of the captives handled them with the reverence one might show relics from a far-off realm. Unaccustomed to material so soft, they patted themselves dry in hesitant motions. To the American guards, however, such measures formed just another standard element of prison operations. For the Japanese prisoners, this initial exposure proved utterly eye-opening. They emerged unsteadily, their hair sodden and their skin flushed from the heat, while a clear wave of wonder rippled through their ranks. The terror that had seized them upon stepping into the shower area gave way to profound confusion. Could their American guards have actually offered solace rather than torment? That initial brush with the facility's bathing setup stayed etched in their memories for years to come. It marked the start of a chain of revelations that upended all the preconceptions instilled in them regarding the foe. Far beyond merely cleansing grime, the moment forced a reckoning with the gap between ingrained narratives and the stark reality unfolding before them. The advanced shower system, complete with its abundant steaming water and cleansing bars, stood as an emblem of a broader truth. Imprisonment need not equate to humiliation, but could instead reveal an unforeseen window into the customs of a rival society. As the initial bathing sessions concluded, and the captives returned to their quarters, an oppressive quiet enveloped the space. Perched on rough-hewn seats, some held their neatly stacked clothing close, while others dried their locks using the substantial cloths provided, grappling with uncertainty over whether this was a genuine boon or some veiled peril. Numerous individuals shunned direct gazes, as if voicing thoughts aloud could shatter an implicit taboo. Beneath the surface, though, a persistent doubt festered within. Time and again, they had been cautioned that falling into U.S. hands spelled shame, brutality, and demise. During hushed pre-combat sessions, their own commanders had evoked visions of barbaric, foe-held sites, brimming with famine and mistreatment. And yet, the very first obligation imposed on them involved scrubbing clean under streams of warm water with actual suds. To a great number, this felt oddly benevolent, excessively humane, and thus potentially deceptive. A particular detainee, once a shipyard technician in the port city of Yokosuka, later reflected on how enemy information drops had portrayed cheerful captives enjoying meals and repose. He had long scorned such documents as fabrications, crafted solely to erode the fighting spirit of his countrymen. After finally feeling the relief of cleanliness for the first time in months, a shiver ran through him as memories of those propaganda drawings resurfaced. Was it possible that certain depictions held a kernel of truth? Yet an even more ominous idea began to take shape in his thoughts. One far more alarming. Suppose the showers served no purpose of sanitation whatsoever. Whispers spread rapidly through the ranks, particularly among those who retained vivid recollections of wartime posters and broadcasts. A few dared to murmur the phrase gas chambers, linking it to hazy accounts of atrocities committed by the Germans across the ocean in Europe. Though specifics remained scarce, the notion that the Americans could repurpose bathing facilities for some covert act of brutality gained traction in low, urgent voices. The sentries picked up on the reluctance, they observed clusters of captives lingering at the thresholds, their expressions etched with doubt and fear. Commands rang out again, and interpreters conveyed in halting Japanese that the procedure was nothing more than required personal hygiene. Still, the wariness proved stubborn and hard to dispel. For warriors conditioned to view capture as a doom surpassing even death, any gesture of apparent kindness bore the sharp edge of trickery. Doubts swirled around the bars of soap handed out. Might they harbor toxins? And the inviting heat of the streams, could it mask a deadly secret? A handful went so far as to avoid a full scrubbing, contenting themselves with a quick splash on limbs and torsos before pulling back. This encounter only heightened the disorientation born of clashing customs. Back in Japan, washing rituals carried profound significance, woven into practices of spiritual cleansing at steaming onsen and in public bathhouses shared among communities. The conflict, however, had eroded such customs, condemning troops to endure prolonged filth, overrun by parasites and plagued by unrelenting ailments. By comparison, the facility's bathing setup felt starkly mechanical. Lines of metallic conduits and grates, streamlined for speed, devoid of seclusion, and run with mechanical precision. From the American viewpoint, it amounted to straightforward sanitation, plain and simple. But to the Japanese captives, the experience seemed foreign, robotic, and profoundly depersonalizing. What had once been a ceremony rich in sacred significance now stood reduced to a mere utility, efficient but profoundly disquieting. Over several days, the detainees' discussions revolved persistently around identical uncertainties. What prompted the Americans to expend heated water on their enemies? Why furnish items like soap, linens, and leisure when neglect and grime would have sufficed? Did this reflect authentic benevolence, or did it form a component of a broader strategy aimed at shattering their psyches? Speculations proliferated within the shadowy confines of the sleeping quarters. Certain individuals contended that these washings served as a mechanism of domination, eroding defiance through the subtle lure of ease. Still others murmured suspicions of secret agents dissolved in the streams. Dread enveloped the group, deepened by recollections of admonitions issued by their commanders. Nevertheless, retribution never materialized. No concealed malice surfaced. Each evening the soldiers made their way back to the lodgings, hearts still beating, bodies intact, and notably fresher than prior. Gradually, distrust started to dissolve, giving way to a subdued, hesitant inquisitiveness. The following morning, and the one beyond, the Americans carried on with the routine unchanged. The distribution of soap persisted, as overseers compelled every individual to step into the bathing facility, yet no dire occurrences unfolded. Distrust endured, now intertwined with a novel sentiment: bewilderment. What sort of foe would concern themselves with ensuring their captives remained fresh-scented or rid of parasitic insects? Among those conditioned from youth to regard imprisonment as an ordeal surpassing even mortality, this dawning insight stirred unease comparable to the baths themselves. Over time, the habitual cycle of personal cleanliness wove itself into the fabric of daily existence in the camp, even if it initially seemed imposed on the Japanese captives. Mornings or evenings, guided by the prevailing timetable, the wardens formed them into ranks and led them toward the bathing area. There, at the threshold, they took possession of soap sheathed in paper that carried an intense artificial aroma wholly alien to their homeland, plus cloths frequently imprinted with insignias from army stockpiles. The process unfolded with unvarying precision. The daily ritual unfolded simply. Disrobe. Enter beneath the flowing water. Cleanse every inch. Towel off. Clothe oneself. And head back. Yet as time stretched from days into weeks, the captives came to see that this practice was no fleeting precaution. Maintaining cleanliness stood as an unyielding mandate, upheld with the same rigor as evening lockdowns and head counts. Through translators, the U.S. forces conveyed the essentials of sanitation, using hand signals to demonstrate correct soap application, not just to limbs and features, but to toes, scalps, and the body's concealed crevices. Afterward came examinations for parasites, conducted by medical personnel who scrutinized the edges of garments and sleeping arrangements. Powders for delousing were distributed, accompanied by fresh linens. It dawned on numerous Japanese troops then that their adversaries approached the battle against illness with the gravity they reserved for rations or armaments. In the American perspective, personal sanitation formed a vital pillar of camp stability, vitality, and regimentation. Among the detainees, however, this regimen evoked a peculiar blend of shame and intrigue. They felt their personal identities eroded, forced to bathe at order like obedient pupils. At the same time, they encountered the unexpected relief of existence, unmarred by perpetual scratching, lesions, and festering injuries. One non-commissioned officer, a veteran of the Guadalcanal campaign, recalled stretches when his squad managed a single rinse in silt-filled waterways as festering tropical ulcers ravaged his fellow fighters. By comparison, mere weeks under the compulsory deluges brought mending to the gashes on his shins, while the persistent hacking in his chest gradually subsided. Such subtle yet irrefutable progress stirred a bitter contradiction, quietly undermining his sense of dignity. In the early days, linguistic obstacles led to constant misunderstandings. Numerous inmates failed to grasp the guards' barked orders regarding shampooing their hair or washing their feet, prompting them to perform only the essentials. Attempts to bypass certain parts of the process resulted in being shoved back beneath the water jets, with overseers standing by restlessly until the suds formed adequately. A few expressed bitterness over the meddling, whispering that it felt humiliating. Still, amid their defiance, they had to acknowledge the outcomes. The camp's standard laundering of their outfits eliminated the reek of decaying fabric that had clung to them before. Their bedding now carried a subtle scent of cleaning agents rather than perspiration and mold. The sleeping quarters, previously overwhelmed by the smell of unclean skin, became somewhat more bearable, including for individuals who kept their approval silent. Over time, initial wariness faded into routine acceptance. Inmates started to expect the schedule, queuing up with diminishing reluctance. They picked up the habit of cleansing more diligently, patting themselves dry attentively, and arranging the linens according to directions. Certain ones even debated the merits of different soaps, observing which foamed more effectively or had a milder aroma. Though a minor aspect, these discussions served as social exchange for people bereft of liberty, helping to occupy the extended periods of inactivity. What was once an imposed directive evolved into a collective practice, subtly forging connections among them. Most profoundly, Many came to recognize that their jailers anticipated a measure of self-respect from them, despite their imprisonment. Being compelled to enter showers and handed bars of soap served more than just the purpose of preventing illness. It imposed a particular notion of human dignity. Within the ranks of the Japanese military, troops had learned that indulgence in comfort signified frailty, while tolerating dirt and suffering stood as a badge of valor. Yet now, subjected to the rigor of their adversaries, they discovered that habitual cleansing held equal weight in regimen as shouldering a weapon. This fundamental conflict in principles left them disoriented, yet it planted the initial traces of grudging admiration for the peculiar, unyielding structure maintained by those who held them captive. When steaming water first streamed down upon their backs, numerous Japanese captives drew sharp breaths, with some recoiling as if burned by intense heat. A reliable, measured flow of warmth emanated from the fixtures above, an unfamiliar luxury to them. For individuals used to rudimentary scrubs in chilly streams, or from hurriedly assembled pails, the feeling bordered on extravagance. Vapors ascended swiftly, twisting through the atmosphere and tempering the stark illumination within the barrack-like enclosure. The unfamiliar, sharp-scented soap bubbled generously across their bodies, stripping off layers of accumulated filth from extended periods. They applied it cautiously initially, then with greater enthusiasm, astonished by how the suds adhered and washed off so effortlessly. To certain individuals, the encounter proved intensely moving. They recalled the prolonged expeditions through dense forests, where commanders had cautioned them to ration every bit of moisture, deeming hygiene a lesser priority than mere endurance. In isolated outposts, opportunities for washing were scarce. Troops cleaned themselves using scraps of fabric, their bodies constantly coated in a grimy layer of perspiration, brine, and grit. Moments when they could warm water over fires in buckets or barrels counted as exceptional favors divided among crowds of soldiers. Yet in this place, every captive enjoyed a personal cascade of soothing heat, as if such indulgence knew no bounds. This went beyond mere cleansing. It transported them to an entirely different realm. The linens handed out following the rinse amplified the astonishment. Plush and thirstily soaking, they stood in stark contrast to the flimsy scraps that men had divided in the sparse Japanese detention centers. The detainees buried their faces in the fabrics, breathing in the subtle artificial aroma of cleaning agents. Their flesh emerged revitalized, with unclogged openings and the cloying residue of humid climates at last scrubbed clean. Beyond bodily comfort, it ignited feelings they had buried deep inside. Certain individuals evoked images of domestic soaks in their hometowns, visions of parents filling basins with steaming liquid prior to the conflict overtaking their existence. Some reflected on communal washing facilities, faint remnants of pre-war ordinary days. These facility rinses revived those familiar feelings, though now shadowed by the oddity of confinement. The U.S. personnel handled the process matter-of-factly, distributing cleansing bars and cloths with the identical straightforward practicality applied to food supplies. To them it represented standard protocol, safeguarding against illness, uplifting spirits, and upholding discipline. For the captives, this development unfolded as a subtle epiphany. The twist stung with harsh irony. They had braced for brutality, only to discover a level of solace surpassing even that found within their own ranks. A few experienced pangs of guilt, convinced that yielding to such luxury eroded their resolve. Many more accepted it without a word, thankful for an interlude that restored a sense of humanity to their weary frames. Gradually, the availability of showers transformed the rhythms of their routine. No longer did they claw at infestations of lice or endure untreated wounds. Instead, they came to appreciate how steaming water eased discomfort and accelerated recovery. Locks that had been oily and tangled softened, becoming manageable under a brush. The persistent stench of perspiration on their clothing faded, giving way to the subtle tang of cleansing lye. The atmosphere inside the quarters freshened, too, shedding its oppressive weight, thanks to consistent washes that tempered the collective reek of crowded captivity. With growing wonder, the inmates recognized these shifts, privately conceding that their well-being now exceeded what they had endured on the battlefield. This contradiction lingered, troubling their thoughts. How was it possible that the foe they had learned to scorn could offer them the kind of attention their own forces had withheld? Those showers went beyond mere washing. They stood as evidence of a regime so methodical and flush with supplies that it could afford to grant solace to even those in chains. As they stood beneath the warm cascades, a mix of admiration and disquiet washed over them. It served as a stark signal of just how alien this environment was compared to the life they had abandoned, and of the vast gap between Japan and such provisions of fundamental respect for its troops. In the evenings, as the lights in the quarters faded and the lines of inmates settled onto their bunks, discussions frequently turned to reflections on their past in the imperial forces. The focus wasn't on armaments or combat, but on the peculiar revelation of sanitation. Veterans who had trekked through Burma and clashed in the Philippine woodlands now murmured about bars of soap, cloths for drying, and the jolt of heated streams. Such matters had never been deemed fitting for warriors to dwell on, yet the disparity demanded attention. Within the Japanese ranks, opportunities for washing were infrequent, seized only when conditions permitted. Leaders preached resilience, the dismissal of physical irritation, and the acceptance of dirt as a badge of hardiness. Troops might endure for weeks without a proper cleanse, their flesh caked in dirt, their attire crusted with the residue of evaporated perspiration. Parasites burrowed into fabric folds, sores from the tropics festered without remedy. The odor of unclean forms permeated every advance, every outpost, every evening under the stars. Voicing grievances about such conditions marked one as frail, unfit for authentic soldiery. But in these USC facilities, sanitation was mandated, as if it ranked alongside order in importance. One detainee, once a sergeant, shared memories of his squad in New Guinea passing around a lone corroded tub of water among 30 souls. They had splashed their faces and palms, yet full immersion was out of the question. He drew a harsh parallel to the ceaseless flow of steaming water now in detention. A different soldier grumbled about his outfit in Manchuria, where frostbite struck not just from the chill, but from donning the identical soiled stockings for months on end. Illness had decimated platoons more ruthlessly than enemy fire. Here in the States, though, each individual washed his feet each day, and medical staff inspected for ailments, as though they tended to cherished cases. The paradox cut deep, leaving a bitter edge. This awareness seeped gradually across the enclosure. Even individuals who held fast to their sense of honor found it impossible to overlook the enhancements in their physical condition. Skin irritations subsided, infestations of lice vanished, and wounds mended. Digestive systems, previously tormented by internal invaders, now stabilized through consistent cleansing and fresher attire. Inmates started to associate these positive changes with the daily practices they had previously opposed. It marked the initial occasion when they recognized that maintaining cleanliness represented not weakness, but resilience, a tool for combating illness that surpassed mere tenacious survival. These insights extended beyond the bodily realm into the realm of culture. Numerous detainees recalled the profound customs of shared bathing in Japan, such as mountain hot springs and simple wooden basins in rural dwellings. Washing oneself had long been woven into everyday existence, linked to kinship and ceremonial observances. The conflict had eradicated this element, degrading soldiers into mere beings eking out existence amid filth. Yet here, under confinement, their adversaries had reinstated what their native forces had withheld. This irony disturbed them deeply. Certain ones discussed it with a sense of yearning, evoking images of their mothers warming pots over fires at dusk. Others grew quiet, embarrassed that the revival of this sense of worth came not from their homeland, but from the United States. The Germans failed to grasp the intensity of this emotional upheaval. To them, cleanliness was merely utilitarian, connected to rules and community welfare. Orders were given with cold detachment, oblivious to the deep significance those standard showers held for the captives. Yet behind the barbed enclosures, soldiers tossed sleeplessly beneath the beams, confronting the harsh truth that the rigid framework of their army existence was deeply imperfect. Enduring grime did not equate to resilience. Overlooking illness did not represent valor. A troubling question emerged. If the United States showed such concern for the well-being of its enemies, what greater priority must it place on the welfare of its own troops? This idea lingered persistently, no matter how disquieting. As days extended into long months, the unfamiliar sanitation practices etched themselves firmly into the fabric of prison life. Each inmate understood the daily sequence: revel, muster, chow time, and the periodic trek to the bathing area at set times. Initial wariness had faded into quiet anticipation. The sentries required less shouting now, and the detainees advanced without the former hesitation. They proceeded in disciplined rows, bars of soap clutched in hands, cloths slung over backs, as if this had long been their norm. The shift extended beyond the body to the mind. These Japanese troops, disarmed and bereft of their mission, unexpectedly reclaimed a sliver of self-respect. Their attire, freshly cleaned on a regular basis, shed the odor of rot. Their forms, scrubbed and inspected, shed parasites and suppurating injuries. Even the clear images in shallow rainwater pools after storms displayed revitalized countenances, less hollowed cheeks, flesh less marred by lesions. No one could refute this progress, though few would voice approval. Hygiene evolved to signify far beyond mere endurance. It stood as evidence that they remained more than mere ghosts of their former selves. The changes spread throughout the quarters. Persistent irritations from infested heads vanished. Bed covers carried a subtle scent of lye instead of damp rot. Overseers noted, occasionally with a grin, that the detainees appeared more disciplined than upon their initial entry. Certain captives, chafed by these comments, held on to inner defiance, insisting that the regimen aimed to erode their resolve. But the reality stood evident. A sense of renewed vigor coursed through them. Injuries mended more swiftly, rest became more profound, and their vitality, despite the constraints of imprisonment, stabilized noticeably. Among certain individuals, this transformation sparked a sense of dignity instead of humiliation. They started arranging their towels with precision once they were dry, shining their footwear more diligently, and maintaining the sleeping quarters in a tidy and disciplined manner. These habits evoked memories of cherished customs from their homeland, the precise customs ingrained in everyday Japanese family life. They came to understand that maintaining hygiene did not equate to yielding to their captors. Rather, it represented a way to recover pieces of their own identity, elements that had been lost amid the filth and turmoil of battle. Discussions among them evolved as well. Soldiers who had previously lacked the stamina for dialogue now exchanged subdued comments on the oddity of their revitalization, on the paradox that their well-being flourished more in confinement than amid the rigors of combat. The American medical staff, ever pragmatic and detached from emotion, documented these advancements meticulously. Instances of dysentery declined, parasite outbreaks diminished, and fatalities dropped. To the captors, such outcomes validated the effectiveness of their approach. To the prisoners, it marked a profound realization. The prisoners found themselves compelled to recognize how their guards enforced personal cleanliness not as some optional luxury, but as an essential pillar of discipline and mutual regard. This approach left them profoundly disoriented, standing in stark opposition to the rugged principles of their own armed forces, where tolerating grime served as a mark of toughness. In this place, however, the dynamic flipped entirely. Purity equaled structure, and structure equaled power. Gradually, the initial wariness surrounding the bathing facilities dissolved to a great extent. The murmurs of dread, fears of toxins laced into the lather or malice concealed within the plumbing, faded into silence. In their place emerged a growing eagerness for the soothing heat, a genuine longing for it amid the deprivations. What had started as a mandated procedure evolved into an awaited interlude, offering a rare bodily comfort in an existence devoid of autonomy. Certain inmates would extend their time beneath the flowing jets beyond the permitted limits, shutting their lids and allowing the liquid to pour down as though it cleansed away not just the grime, but the lingering stains of loss and failure. Within the hush of these habitual acts, a number of them came to see that maintaining hygiene transcended mere commands from overseers. It represented a reclaiming of self-worth, a pathway back to humanity, despite the enclosing fences of thorns. This quiet yet profound shift affected more than their physical forms. It reshaped their understanding of what it truly meant to persist. As the fall gusts blew through the enclosure and the daylight hours dwindled, discussions among the captives took on a new direction. Gone were the hushed arguments over concealed threats or veiled brutality. Now, the exchanges centered on a fresh wonder, the dawning awareness that these everyday practices of suds, steaming liquid, and drying cloths were no mere quirks of imprisonment, but emblems of a broader significance. In the shadowed quarters, where figures huddled in folded positions atop their sleeping platforms, they started sharing tales of those initial exposures to the washing stations, chuckling uneasily at their past anxieties and expressing awe at the sheer normalcy that had settled in. A former infantry officer, known for his unyielding demeanor, later revealed that upon entering the humid enclosure for the first time, he suspected it was a lethal ruse aimed at their demise. Fellow captives responded with light laughter, nodding in shared recollection, even as several conceded to harboring identical suspicions. One of the group, a more youthful and loquacious individual, drew parallels between the facility's bathing areas and the grand communal spas of Tokyo that he had explored during his childhood. This likeness evoked a wave of wistful whispers among them. For a fleeting instant, the men found themselves mentally whisked away to realms of mosaic surfaces and simple wooden tubs, to those cozy nights when kin and community members gathered in communal comfort. The paradox hit home for everyone present. It was under the control of their adversaries that these echoes of the past resurfaced. Yet, what truly disturbed them went beyond the facilities themselves, pointing instead to deeper truths about the United States. If this nation could sustain an unending supply of heated water, even for those in captivity, what provisions must it extend to its fighting forces? If cleansing bars and drying cloths were handed out with such generosity in this place, what indulgences surely awaited on domestic military installations? This disparity ate away at their thoughts, recalling fallen allies who succumbed to sepsis for lack of pure liquid to cleanse injuries, troops who trudged onward while parasites burrowed into their heads, and fighters who deteriorated not just from starvation, but from the relentless toll of filth and illness on their frames. Coming to terms with how much the foe prioritized cleanliness led numerous detainees to murmur, in subdued tones and without fanfare, that this might well be among the hidden pillars of U.S. power. Discussions among them began to flow with greater candor. At the communal dining tables in the mess hall, as they consumed their simple meals of bread, potatoes, or beans, a few prisoners voiced their astonishment without reservation. They confessed that prior to their surrender, they had pictured Americans as savage monsters. In reality, though, they found their captors to be disciplined and systematic, right down to routine tasks like washing up. Some went beyond that, proposing that such conduct revealed a whole society founded on plenty and precision, affluent enough to apply these standards to foes as well. Such notions ignited arguments, since not every captive was ready to confront those troubling realities. Nationalistic fervor persisted, causing numerous individuals to recoil from any hint of American supremacy. Nevertheless, the proof was inescapable in their freshly washed bodies, the mended wounds, and the boost to their well-being. For certain men, this awareness soured into resentment. They grumbled that the ease was a calculated ploy to undermine their resolve, eroding the toughness that had long marked Japanese troops. In contrast, others experienced a contrasting sentiment, an uneasy admiration. They started seeing the bathing facilities less as basic sanitation and more as a glimpse into the immense wealth, manufacturing power, and contrasting worldview of those holding them. Quietly, a handful conceded that the ordeal had reshaped their vision of life outside the fences. In this way, the showers, initially dreaded as tools of harsh treatment, evolved into spaces of profound insight. Beyond mere cleansing with soap and water, They highlighted the profound divide between contrasting societies, revealing that the adversary's strength derived not solely from armaments, but from intricate ways of living so sophisticated that they even enveloped captured soldiers in their structured routines. Long after the conflict concluded, and numerous Japanese captives made their way back to their homeland, the experience of imprisonment lingered as a tangled blend of embarrassment, gratitude, and bewilderment. Amid the myriad memories etched deeply in their thoughts, however, a single vivid picture endured with remarkable sharpness. The showers themselves. Combatants who had battled across remote atolls, witnessing fellow soldiers perish amid tropical traps and sea assaults, recalled most vividly the rush of warm water from overhead fixtures, the lather forming between their fingers, and the compulsory routine of sanitation that at first disoriented them before ultimately reshaping their outlook. Certain ex-captives shared these details with their loved ones, fumbling through explanations of how the Americans had demanded regular personal upkeep. Their spouses and parents absorbed the accounts with skepticism. How was it possible for a foe to extend such attentiveness? Some chose quietude, hesitant to confess that imprisonment had delivered amenities surpassing what their military had supplied. Privately, though, a good number conceded that the sanitation protocols in the detention facilities had forever shifted their view of existence. The endless supply of steaming water served as irrefutable evidence of a society unlike their own, one that was contemporary, plentiful, and methodically arranged in manners that Japan, for all its rigor and heritage, simply could not replicate amid the wartime struggles. This reminiscence carried no trace of nostalgia. To the detainees, the showers had seemed alien, degrading, and even alarming in the beginning. Over time, however, those emotions shifted. With illnesses fading, injuries mending, and infestations eradicated, the connection deepened and solidified. Maintaining cleanliness was synonymous with power. The prisoners came to understand that well-being wasn't an extravagance, but rather a strategic tool, deployed by the United States in a subtle and potent manner. During discussions led by Barbaric following their return home, several confessed that this insight stood out as the most profound takeaway, surpassing lessons in combat strategies and instead highlighting the influence of contemporary quality-of-life norms. Scholars conducting subsequent interviews with these men frequently observed the recurring theme of showers in their accounts. In contrast to the inconsistencies in provisions or labor duties across different facilities, the practice of personal sanitation remained almost entirely consistent everywhere. Its effect penetrated more profoundly than allocations of loaves or tobacco. Individuals who had weathered famine during frontline service accepted the sparse provisions in captivity without much astonishment, yet receiving bars of soap and linens, then being led into chambers filled with warm vapor and flowing water. This proved indelible, precisely due to its complete unfamiliarity amid the hardships of war. It represented not pampering, but a fundamentally contrasting perspective on existence in which adversaries acknowledged even those in custody as individuals deserving the dignity of cleanliness. The enduring consequences persisted in subtle ways. Certain ex-captives, after reintegrating into everyday society, continued the practices acquired during their confinement. They bathed with greater frequency, demanding soap despite shortages. They instilled in their offspring the idea that sanitation constituted a regimen of strength rather than vulnerability. To these men, the showers in the camps transcended simple protocols. They served as profound awakenings, teachings that echoed through the years. Looking back, that recollection carried a poignant mix of sorrow and solace. It evoked images of loss, capitulation, and the sting of imprisonment. Yet it also evoked endurance and an unforeseen sense of honor amid dealings with foes they had long been conditioned to despise. For numerous individuals, this contradiction became the essence of their wartime experience, that, amid the depths of shame, they had caught sight of a progressive era impossible to erase from memory. Those bathing facilities went beyond mere rinsing with water and lather. They represented a revelation that hygiene, discipline, and attentiveness, even under duress, had the power to reshape how a person perceived his role within existence itself.